Welcome to Outside Views. Today we're discussing a topic that hits at the core of post-Brexit economic realities, the sharp decline in British food exports to the EU. Since Brexit, British businesses in the food and agriculture sectors have seen a devastating drop in trade with the EU, amounting to over £3 billion annually. And this represents a 16% decline in food exports to the Union across the past 3 years, and the numbers show no signs of recovery. The reasons behind this dramatic fall aren't a mystery. The added layers of bureaucracy, border checks, and compliance costs since Brexit have turned what was once a seamless trading relationship into an almost insurmountable challenge for many businesses. For those of us who view Brexit as a historic mistake, this is yet another example of how the decision to leave the EU has created significant economic barriers rather than the promised opportunities. To truly grasp the depth of this issue, we must start by revisiting the pre-Brexit landscape. Before Brexit, the UK was part of the EU single market and the customs union. And this arrangement eliminated tariffs and allowed for frictionless trade between member states, which still does for 27, ensuring that goods could move across borders without the need for extensive checks or paperwork. And for decades, this system benefited businesses on both sides, creating a reliable supply chain and fostering economic growth. In the food sector, this was especially important because agricultural products often have short shelf lives and require efficient transportation. The single market allowed British food producers to export goods to the EU quickly and without delay, helping them remain competitive in the global market. But all of that changed in January 2021 when the Brexit transition period ended and the UK officially left the single market and the customs union. Suddenly, the UK became what the EU classifies as a third country in trading terms. And this meant that British exports to the EU were now subject to physical border checks, health certificates, and customs declarations. For food products, these additional requirements introduced significant delays, added costs, and new risks. Where British businesses once enjoyed some of the easiest market access in the world, they now face some of the most complex regulations for exporting to the EU. One company that has been deeply affected is Ramsden International, for example, a wholesaler based in the UK. The company's CEO, Sean Ramsden, described the challenges as mind-boggling. To comply with the British new paperwork requirements, Ramsden had to hire 9 additional staff members, shrink the range of products his company exports, and extend lead times from 3 days to 3 weeks. And these changes have not only increased operational costs, but also reduced the company's competitiveness in the European market. And Ramsden's experience is far from unique. Across the food and agriculture sectors, businesses have reported similar struggles. The Centre of Inclusive Trade Policy recently found that the £3 billion annual drop in food exports is directly linked to these new regulatory barriers. New for the UK once again, they are old overall. And the impacts aren't limited to businesses alone. Consumers in both the UK and the EU are also feeling the effects. For British consumers, the costs of importing food from the EU have risen as new border checks and customs rules have added billions to consumables. For EU consumers, some British products have become harder to find as producers scale back exports due to rising costs and logistical hurdles. And this situation is particularly troubling for small and medium-sized enterprises, which lack the resources to adapt to these changes as effectively as larger companies. For smaller businesses, the cost of compliance with new EU regulations can exceed the value of the trade itself, forcing many to abandon the European market entirely. And this loss of access to such a significant trading partner has long-term implications for the UK economy. The UK government has acknowledged these challenges and floated the idea of a veterinary or sanitary and phytosanitary agreement with the EU. Such an agreement could reduce or eliminate the need for many of the current border checks on agricultural goods, easing trade and lowering costs. A report from Aston University found that a veterinary agreement could boost UK agri-food exports to the EU by staggering 22.5%. However, despite these promising figures, there has been little progress on this front. The Labour Party, which is now in government, has pledged to improve the UK's trading relationship with the EU. Their manifesto included a commitment to negotiating a veterinary agreement to help businesses in the food and agriculture sectors that are hit that hard. But as of now, concrete steps toward achieving this goal remain unclear. One of the complicating factors is the growing divergence in standards between the UK and the EU. While the EU has introduced stricter standards in areas such as pesticides and hazardous substances, the UK has focused on implementing higher animal welfare standards. These differences make regulatory alignment more challenging, even though food produced in both regions is generally considered safe, but that doesn't matter. Industry experts like Marco Forgione, the Director General at the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade, have called for closer alignment to rebuild trust in the supply chain. Forgione emphasized that the UK and the EU share similarly high standards and greater cooperation could ease the current frictions. But time is of the essence. Without decisive action, the risk of further declines in trade and economic harm remains significant. The current state of UK-EU food trade is not just a consequence of Brexit. It's a symptom of the broader economic challenges created by the decision to leave the EU. Proponents of Brexit promised that leaving the Union would open up new opportunities for British businesses and reduce regulatory burdens. But for the food and agriculture sectors, the reality has been quite the opposite. Rather than simplifying trade, Brexit has introduced new layers of complexity for Britain that have made it harder for British businesses to compete. And while some hope that a reset in UK-EU relations will address these issues, the path to achieving meaningful progress remains quite uncertain. And as we reflect on this topic, it's clear that the consequences of Brexit are far-reaching and deeply entrenched. The £3 billion annual loss in food exports to the EU is not just a statistic. It represents jobs lost, businesses struggling, and consumers paying the price for political decisions. For those of us who see Brexit as a mistake, these numbers are a stark reminder of how much has been sacrificed for the promise of sovereignty. So, thank you for joining me today once again on Outside Views. And if you found this topic insightful, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the UK and the EU can find a way to rebuild their trading relationship? Or is this just the new normal for British businesses? And if you haven't already, check out my earlier videos on Brexit's economic impact. They provide valuable context for today's discussion. I'll see you next time with more stories that matter. Until then, take care, and the next video is right here in the end screen.